Good day, this is ImagineTime, and we're going to cover the Narrative Slip Invoice or the Narrative Invoice today. I'm going to select Billing from the dashboard, choose Billing Dashboard. I'm going to use today's date for the billing posting and invoice display date. Click Open Dashboard, select All Rise Rows, one particular client to work on today for this demonstration. Now the first thing when you're doing a narrative slip invoice is to realize that it is based on time slips. Even though the individual time slips will not display on the invoice, you have to release some time and or expenses. So here we have All Rise Robes with $2,753 in inventory and $130 of expenses. But I have really no idea what that time consists of. Now we have another video covering pre-billing reports, but let's quickly display one here. On the bottom left, I'm choosing Print Selected WIP. That's going to print WIP for the highlighted row right here, where you see that little black arrow that now has turned white. Print Selected WIP. On the selections, I'm going to choose the subtotal by code. Notice here that it's pre-selected on the selection screen. Clicking print, I can see all the work in progress for this particular client. And from looking at this report, I see that I have a year-end engagement, and that's what I want to bill today. And I also have some management advisory services. I'm not going to bill those today. That engagement is ongoing. So this is the section that we want to describe on our narrative invoice. We're going to release the time, and then we're going to type a paragraph description or two regarding the services provided here. Let's bear in mind for the year-end engagement that the total time is $2233.75, and that last year we billed $2,200, and I think this year we'll bill $2,500. So we're going to write up the time to an amount that the client probably would be happy to pay based upon the services that we've provided. So let's close this screen, and now what we need to do is release the time for that year-end engagement. So I'm going to click Release Edit Slips. For the row that I'm on is our indicator. Choose Engagement Filter 2016, and I'm going to click Release. Well, first I'm going to hold all the time. Now I know that everything is held, and if I choose this engagement filter for 2016 and click Release, I know that that's the only time that's been released, and that should agree to our WIP report. Notice down here on the bottom middle it does, $2233.75. Now, you don't have to use these quick release and hold options. You can actually go in, and if I clear the filter, you can pick and choose time to release like that. That's covered in a separate video. For now, we have released the time for the 2016 year-end engagement. I'm going to close the screen. Oh, one more thing to do. Let's bill the expenses. Now I have two expenses, one for 75 and one for 55. So I'm going to release both of those like that. And now we're ready to bill. Now we have to decide how we want our expenses to display on the invoice. So let's take a look in the invoice format and design, and under invoice total and expenses, right now I'm going to show them in detail below total charges. I have several options here. I can show them summarized, I can show them grouped. I can also group them in with the explanation if I wanted to type something like professional services including expenses. But for now I'm going to show them in detail below the total charges. Let's go ahead now and type our explanation for this invoice. So if this is the highlighted row and I've had current row selected instead of all bills, I can simply click Print Bills, and it's going to pop up kind of a word processing screen, if you will. So I can type year-end compilation for 2016, and I can also type tax services. I'm going to keep this very simple. Now if I wanted to make that somewhat fancier, I could put bullets in. There is a full screen editor here, so I have to click it. It pops up on the bottom of the taskbar. I can really go to town on this. I can see I don't want an extra bullet point. Tax services, including planning for next year. There is a spell checker in here, which I can use. I want to go to the end here of this line, turn off the bullets, jump down, including expenses and travel to client. Let's see what that looks like. Click Print Bills. I'm going to preview it, so I'm going to answer no. And here's a simple narrative invoice. It has a header on it, and then here's our detailed explanation with some more information here. We haven't affected the write-up at this point. We're billing it at standard. There's a remittance advice at the bottom and a comment. The comment can be customized by the client or general in nature. And we've shown a bitmap graphic at the top of our invoice. Let's close this screen, and now let's write it up. I'm going to type in $2,500. Now, if I'm satisfied with the weighted average allocation write-up between the time slips involved on this engagement, I need do nothing further except click Print Bills. There's my invoice with the write-up. If I'm curious about that, I can click the Allocate Adjustments button on the bottom middle of the screen, and it shows me the weighted average allocation for all the slips. Now, I can individually allocate by going in here and typing in different values for the slip. When would that be appropriate? Possibly a new staff person that's just learning is on the engagement and their time is not productive, so you choose to value it at 0 and allocate adjustments between the productive and non-productive staff, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to close that, accepting the weighted average allocation. One more thing that I didn't talk to you about was the custom header. Now, if I click this custom header button, down here you're going to see Year-End Accounting and Tax Service Retain Header. So each time I print an invoice, this explanation will appear unless I blank it out. I go in here and delete that with the backspace key or the delete key. Or if I uncheck Retain Header, the next time I'll have to type a new custom header. And I'm going to keep that for now and preview this one more time. And I'm pretty satisfied with this. And the point about a narrative explanation or narrative slip invoice is it's the simplest paragraph invoice to use when you don't want to show the detail. Fairly easy to learn. There aren't a lot of steps involved. One last thing before we go on. You must preview an invoice before it can be posted. The preview process creates the temporary transaction that can be emailed and posted. Furthermore, if you make any changes, you must preview the invoice a second time. At this point, we're ready to send it to the client. The only remaining steps are to decide whether or not you want to email the invoice to the client or if you would like to just go ahead and post the invoice. So at this point, you'd click this button, Post. We cover this in another video, so I won't get into details here, but you'd either email it and then post it. You must email it before you post. That's the only rule there. When it's posted, briefly, the time is cleared, it's not deleted, and any billing adjustments are posted into the system so that you can see performance analysis by client and staff. We cover that in a video concerning dashboard basics, so I won't get into a lot of detail about that now. The other thing I could briefly cover is, what about if you're doing more than one? Well, you can choose narrative slip for the next row down, and I'm going to quick release. In fact, let's do a simpler situation. Let's use this one, narrative slip. And to quick release time, you can see the little hint here. It says double click to release all slips for this client. So if you know you're going to bill all the slips, you can just double click. It automatically selects narrative bill, and if I'm still on current row, I can click and type services. Let's just type that, and then click print preview, and there it is. I'm showing the balance forward on this particular invoice, which I wouldn't normally do on an invoice that doesn't have a balance forward. And our system actually does that for you. It decides whether or not clients have balance forwards. That's a feature in the system. Let me show you that. In the More Format and Billing options, there's a checkbox here, Auto Set Previous Balances on Invoices. So if that's checked, when you open the dashboard, it will automatically check. Let's go out to the right here. Previous balance, this checkbox here, will be automatically checked to show the previous balance. But on this particular invoice, we don't want to show the previous balance. So let's display it again. And there it is without the previous balance information. You can also hide the payment stub. That's fairly easy to do. You go into Invoice Format and Design and don't show the payment stub. And when you're showing balance forwards, you have quite a bit of choices here. Show mini statement at the top or the bottom of the invoice. which shows some activity since the last invoice, or just a balance forward. And again, we cover that in more detail in another video. All right, so closing this screen, I've demonstrated how to do a narrative invoice by picking and choosing the time or doing the quick release, and that also applies to expenses. If you double click on the expenses here, and there were some, it would quick release those expenses as well. Now, not all clients want to do one invoice at a time. They may choose to do all the invoices, and in fact you may set all your invoices to be narrative slip invoices because that's your preferred method of doing things. Now, if that's what you'd like to do, click More Format Billing Options and choose Preferred Bill Type. So I'm going to choose narrative slip, and if I click yes here, it's going to set all my invoice types to narrative slip. Now I'm going to demonstrate another feature. I'm going to clear the dashboard so nothing is in a pre-billing state. I'm going to set all bills, and I'm going to choose all rise robes. I'm going to release all the time and all the expenses, and I'm going to also go down to American Trading and double click and release all. I'm going to write this up to 3,500, and I'm going to leave this one alone. And with all bills, I get, if you'll notice in the bottom left here, one of two. Up here it says ALLR, all rise robes. So here's my explanation for all rise robes. All rise robes, year end. Then I need to click the navigation, bottom left here, to go to the next invoice, American Trading. So now in this instance, I'm doing the bills in batches. And I've done the all rise robes, the time is released, and I've done the American Trading. Many people like to work in batches. If in fact when you do your batch invoicing you release all the time through a certain date, you can use the global release feature. So I'm going to release all the time and all the expenses through this date, and I'm going to begin invoicing the clients. So those clients that have time and expenses through this date will automatically be set up to invoice. You'll see how that works. Click release, answer yes. Now I'm going to choose up here clients selected for billing, and you can see all the clients that have time have the click to bill checked, which means they're ready for invoicing. The only thing I need to do now is click print bills. Now it's creating temporary invoices. Invoices aren't finalized until you click post. So at this point, it's warning us that this client doesn't have an address. We're going to skip that one. Now, one of 168. So I've got 168 invoices. Invoice 1, and this is for gift of roses. And then that was the previous invoice that we were working on. Didn't overwrite that. Invoice 3, and so on and so forth. I click print and preview. There's 1, 2, 3, but all the other ones don't have, except the one we were working on. They don't have an explanation yet. So that would be an example of how to do a large group of invoices all at once. And you can go back after you've worked on those and modify them. For instance, if I found that I wanted to change the explanation for just one invoice, I could click all rise robes and double click on narrative slip. It's going to pull up that one invoice explanation, and at this point I can close the screen, and if I want to redo or re-review the whole batch, I'm going to get those errors again. But you can see that when we're done, I get the modified explanation for that one invoice. At this point I have one final example to show you. So I'm going to clear the dashboard. That means all these temporary bills I'm going to erase. So clearing the dashboard, all the click to bills are unchecked, and I want to select one client, all rise robes, and I'm going to release all the time. I'm going to leave the expenses alone this time. And I'm going to click, well actually I want to show you another example here. Choosing current row, I'm just going to double click on narrative slip. That's a quick way to get there. I'm going to use the saved explanation feature, just like that, with the caret Y for the year end, and I'm going to click preview and print. and you'll see how it inserts the year and the saved explanation is displayed. Let's go in here again, and I'm going to hit enter, hit F4, choose another explanation, and you can see I've modified that. So that's the saved explanation feature that I wanted to display to you. And I see that the expenses have been released, so they're displaying on there. I'm going to hide them by double clicking on the released. Preview that again, and my explanation's gone. Load last explanation retrieves it at the top left. Preview and print bills, and here is the same invoice without the expense information. Let's cover a few more things quickly. Let's release the expenses. Go to Invoice Format and Design, Total Expenses, and let's group them. So now what's going to happen here is the expenses are going to be cleared when the bill is posted, as will the time. But you'll notice that on the invoice, I'm saving this explanation, the expenses don't display. So I would probably want to say, maybe somewhere down here, including expenses. And you can type that however you wish. But that's an example of how an invoice can clear time and expenses without displaying the expenses. The other two options, grouping and summarized, are self-evident, so I won't get into those. The last feature that I would like to show you has to do with really long narrative invoices. Now, you've seen me do two things. When I select a row using current row down here, I can click print bills and the invoice description box for that particular invoice will display, or I can just jump in by double clicking. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to press F4 and choose long. I'm going to backspace, the cursor right now is down here, I'm going to backspace up to the bottom of the row that has the last amount of text on it and click. Now you can see the nature of a narrative invoice. If you really want to say quite a bit, you can on a narrative invoice. If you have a very detailed project and you need to cover every aspect of what you did, and again you're not showing the time slips, you can show quite a bit. One of the things you need to do, if that's your goal, you have to choose under Invoice Format, under Other, Use Long Format Narrative. So that covers our narrative invoice. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Make sure you review the Dashboard Essentials video that shows the basics of the dashboard. That gets into bill posting and more into producing WIP reports. Thank you and have a great day.